go. All right, so 5DO. So a little short on that wall at the marginal ridge, not much more than 1 millimeter. I would make a little bit more square in here so that you have more of a dovetail for retention. It should look more like a foot than a banana. Okay? And you're leaning your burr toward the adjacent tooth like this. So that's a failing error on the damage to the adjacent tooth. And you're right, that you can't really fix. You could potentially make it look better, but it's hard to, it takes a lot of skill to make it look better. And if you have that much skill, you wouldn't have hit it in the first place. So usually you can't do much about it. Now your axial wall is a bit deep, isn't it? It should be about here. Yeah. And then when you lean your burr toward the adjacent tooth, you also undercut the axial wall. That made it even deeper. So make sure you look this way, and then check your vertical angle this way, but look this way when you're doing it. Okay, so this needed to be fixed. This is an amalgam prep. If it were a composite, this bevel would be okay. But amalgam hates bevels, okay? So you should go back and use this as the margin and recut that angle at 90 degrees. Lingually, you're closer to 90. It's a little bit divergent though. So if I look down this way, yeah, so you undercut the facial wall, but you're divergent lingual. Usually that means that somebody's trying to look this way when they're doing it. They're trying to use direct vision. And you know, most people that try to look from the facial by direct vision when they do this prep encounter a lot of problems. But especially leaning the burr away from themselves. And you got to check to make sure you're not leaning the burr away from yourself. All right, so the major errors, the damage on the adjacent tooth, the bevel on the facial margin, the depth axially right here. That's almost into the pulp chamber. It even could be. Okay, so the height of the shortest wall, you're a little short, so you're underextended pulpally. That's the height. And the position of the wall, okay, so basic shape in that area, form of the dovetail. But the facial exit angle, that's a bevel. That won't work. The clearances aren't all that unreasonable. So you're pretty close as far as the clearances go. The damage on the adjacent tooth is a big problem. I think you tried to make a retentive groove. But if your axial wall is too deep, then put the retentive groove where it should have been, about right here. Don't put the retentive groove at the axial wall if the axial wall is too deep. That gets even closer to the pulp horn. You might have a bleeding groove there. Okay, so pretty good attempt in the event. Okay. So for 19, all right, so as I said, with composite, you can have a bevel, but this is a little bit too much of a bevel. You know, you've really just damaged that margin outside the prep. Pretty hard to cover that and have it last with composite. But your clearances are a little much. Damage on the adjacent tooth is minimal. Your exit angles are good for composite. Be careful about the internal land angles. Define them better. I want square internal land angles. So if your exit angles were a little closer to 90, it'd be easier to find square corners. It'd be easier to get the shape of the axial wall correct. Okay, and you didn't quite get the bevel in the middle here, but you did make an attempt to make a bevel, and it joins the facial angle walls pretty well. Pretty wide on the occlusal for composite. And you almost got into this pit right here, but you know, take the whole pulpal floor right into that pit. But yeah, just leave it the width of the burr. Okay, so the clearance is facial-lingually, moderately overextended. So the axial, basically the width of the gingival floor, a little bit underextended, especially at the facial-lingual walls. The internal line angles poorly formed. Okay, adjacent damage minimal. Again, any grades to the right of that middle line are failing. Okay. And, but you got into the grooves the way you should have. The bevel's just a little weak. But at least you got a bevel in a good portion of it. That lingual exit angle, I would probably have gone back and recontoured the outside surface.
Okay.
And made that bevel sort of look like it went away. Do some enameloplasty there, and then this is the actual margin right here. Okay. Okay, so the lingual exit angle. But I'm not going to give that a major error because I think you could recontour it. So that one was better. Okay, so for number 3. Okay. So your distal pit is in the central fossa. Right?
Yeah.
So what happened to the distal lingual groove going this way? Right? The distal lingual groove goes like this, and then you put the burr this way to make the C-plane, right? Yeah. None of that happened. You made a facial lingual groove instead of a distal lingual groove. So, we don't expect it to fit the opposing tooth very well. Okay, your chamfers are mostly pretty good. I'm not seeing any ski jumps. They're fairly light, but not too far off. The taper mesial distally, just barely. Mesial lingual to distal buccal, got a little undercut on the distal buccal. Better over here, facial lingually. Okay, you got some draw there. The taper on the facial. Reasonable, except for you start leaning outward right there in the distal buccal. So that's where you have the undercut. So distal buccal to mesiolingual. Okay, so as far as the axe reduction, you did a pretty decent job. As far as the occlusal anatomy goes, I'm worried about your clearances. So you got your A plane done all right. B plane, that's where you don't have the clearance.
Yes.
Right? It's less than about a half millimeter right there. And that's just because you didn't do any of the anatomy on the functional cusp correctly. Okay, so that was pretty close. You could easily fix the clearances. The opposing tooth will force you to get the anatomy right. But of course, it's a great start if you get it. If you get, for example, that distal pit and the distal lingual groove going in the right direction, that's always a good start. All right, so pretty heavy as far as your shoulders are concerned. I like to have it a little bit heavier here and here, but not so heavy on the mid-facial. Okay, so the axe reduction at the shoulder, so OX, overextended, mid-facial. We'll check the taper compared to the adjacent tooth. So your tapers, well, you're leaning out a little bit at the bottom. See that? But, that kind of gave you a heavier shoulder, and so the lab would, if they need to, they'll just block out that bottom part. But your axe reduction of the facial is okay. But don't forget a secondary plane toward the incisal third. And let's see if you've angled the shoulder. Okay. That's reasonably angled. Okay. Now I'm a little bit worried about the taper. I'd like to have the taper more obvious between the mesial and the distal.
Okay.
The chamfer is okay, no ski jumps. But if I look this way, especially right here, so I'm seeing an undercut from the mesial buccal to distal lingual. So a lot of times when people lean the burr outward in the midfacial, they also lean the burr outward at these corners. Or they might lean it outward in the corners when they don't at the midfacial, but so mesial buccal to distal lingual for sure. Distal buccal to mesial lingual, that's probably drawing there. Easy to fix. Okay, incisal reduction. That's close. I would probably do a little bit more toward the mesial side.
Okay.
Clearance, not enough really, huh? Of course, the opposing tooth is kind of loose. If you push it in, you got enough clearance. But yeah, I would have reduced lingually a little bit more. Now, then the incisal edge gets thin, but the incisal edge gets thin because you over-reduce the facial. Okay, but you got the basic shape over here, you got the cingulum reduced, you got the height of the wall here. All right, so pretty reasonable. You avoided a lot of serious mistakes. So again, this one's close. So when I say close, I mean, you know,
I know.
it's just a couple things that you can fix that will make it pass.
Okay.
Okay, so you got a couple that are close and you need them to fix some things. But overall, pretty good. All right, that's...
I'm in the right way.
Yeah.
The right path.
Yeah, exactly. And that's way better than you were doing earlier in the week. Way better. Cool.
See?
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, you also graded it yourself, so it'll be interesting to see if your check marks correspond to mine.
Yeah.
Okay, so for 5, let me see. You have a ball burnisher somewhere? Oh, okay. I should recognize it by the pattern on the handle. Okay, so we got some serious problems here, huh?
Yeah.
So what are the 2 biggest problems?
I extended it too visually.
Yeah, but you didn't fail yourself. Oh, I see that. The
Position of
position, yeah, you did there. And yeah, okay. So you got a acute angle on the facial. Well, you got to fix that. That means you have to bring the margin out here. You've got to get the margin out there. You can't leave an acute angle. If you overextend, you might not fail, but leaving an acute angle, you will fail, for sure. Okay, so your pulpal floor position is okay. The clearance is okay. You're a little bit acute on the lingual wall as well. Again, let's really try to keep it exactly 90 degrees. And just make sure you're looking this way. Now you notice there's a lot of damage on the outside surface of this tooth, so you didn't put in a new tooth. So you cut away part of the oblique ridge or marginal ridge from the outside. But you definitely got too close to it from the inside. But maybe it would look better if you didn't have that damage on the outside surface.
yeah.
So, you know, like I said, you know, the judgment you made was to not change this tooth.
Yeah.
Okay, axial position's reasonable. Gingival clearance is okay. You tried to make a retentive groove there. A little bit big over here, but you're at least getting the idea. But, you know, the most obvious things, this one you could have fixed, this one you couldn't quite. And again, don't forget the dovetail goes facially. It's a foot the heel goes here, the toe goes to the facial.
Okay.
That's where the decay is. Okay, so those are the big things. Yeah, so when you made your retentive groove, you actually got too deep axially on the facial side. You did lean the burr toward the adjacent tooth like this, and that's why the axial is undercut there. And again, if you're trying to look down the axis when you're doing it, it's going to be a disaster every time. So the gingival floor width basically is overextended at the facial. Okay. So for 19, okay, so it's wider than the burr, so it's a little bit overextended facial-lingually in the occlusal, but your basic outline form's okay. Lean a little more obviously toward the lingual. So I just put not lean to lingual. But, you know, it's a little bit too vertical there. Okay, so the clearance here is fine. Your exit angle is fine. Clearance here is a little much on the lingual. So facial, lingual proximal clearance, not a failing error, but you know, exit angles are fine for composite. Your gingival bevel, I can see it. It's a little too vertical. It doesn't quite connect to the facial wall, so it's a little bit poorly formed, but at least you gave it a try. The axial wall position's okay, probably a little overextended toward the facial side there. And yeah, gingival clearance a little bit too much, but we're still hitting pretty close to what you really want to be doing.
Okay.
Okay, so that one's not too bad. Okay, so let's take a look at number 3. Okay, so the facial taper is close. There's a little tendency to lean out at the bottom of the wall, especially toward the distal, but we'll see if that has any consequences. All right, mesial distal tapers, okay. Facial lingual is okay. Between the corners, you're okay. Between this corner and here, since you tapered a lot on the mesial lingual, so the tendency to have an undercut on the distal buccal is still draws, so you're okay there. That chamfer looks a little bit heavy, so is it a ski jump? Actually, it is. Did you see that? And you decided not to do anything about it? Why are you making me work?
I just saw it.
You just saw it. Okay, I said, did you see that? Not do you see that? So, you know, all it takes is that little ski jump. Now, the occlusal could be beautiful, but that little ski jump is what fails the prep. Okay, look how easy it is to see it now. Now again, why did I see it and you didn't? I wanted to see it.
Yeah.
My job is to see it. Okay, so make it your job too, okay?
Yeah.
All right, so I like your A plane pretty well. B plane, you don't have the clearance. Okay, now again, this would have told you that.
Yeah, I tried to modify it.
Okay, well then do it again and
Yeah.
But you know, I could even get a ball burnisher through there. I can even see the oblique ridge right here, and I know the clearance there is probably less than 0.5 millimeter. So you got to get that. And your pit and your groove are going the right direction, but you didn't make the C plane with the burr pointing this way. You didn't make a groove here on the C plane. So make sure you make that C plane, okay? Okay, so
I made my C plane, but when I'm doing lingual axial reduction now, it just disappears.
well, now better make it again.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so of course that's a really funny looking shape there, isn't it?
Yeah.
Clearly a ski jump, but it looks like you used a round burr in there.
No.
What burr did you use that make that big hole there? That's interesting. Okay, so in any event, the axe reduction here is just fine. No, not too far off over here. It's a little bit much over here, but you're reasonably close. Did you angle the shoulder? I'm not convinced.
I did.
Yeah, but you might have angled it, but you didn't get an angled shoulder.
Okay.
So test it to see if you actually got an angled shoulder. If the margin breaks like that, it's not angled. Okay. So if it's horizontal at the line angles, that's the classic mistake. That's the one that students hate because they end up with a crown that has gaps of unsupported, of breaking out enamel there. Okay, so your chamfer is pretty close, except for, of course, the distal ski jump. So again, look for these things. Don't assume you have it right just because you did it, right? Okay, now let's take a look at the taper on the mid-facial. That looks pretty good, so I don't have much trouble with that. The incisal reduction also looks reasonable. Clearance, not quite enough, so you didn't reduce these marginal ridges up toward the incisal edge enough to get the clearance. All right, so yeah, you can see it's a little bit too concave, and you're like preserving those marginal ridges when in fact our job is to cut them off. Okay, but your convergence in all directions is pretty good, so you know this is really easy to fix. Okay, so fix it, and I'll take another look at it a little bit later. Okay, everybody ready here? You ready? Cool. I'm going to steal your chair, though.
Oh, okay.
You're sitting on my table. Okay, got a ball burnisher over there somewhere? I usually use that for pointing. Thank you. Okay, so for 5DO, okay, the adjacent tooth got too much hurt. So again, if you're leaning the burr this way and undercutting the axial wall, I know you're trying to look down the axis when you're doing the prep. And nobody can do that. It cannot be done. Okay, so the axial wall, let me put it this way. Don't have a good place for that. Let me see. Yeah, but I'll just say it's undercut. The position of the axial wall is not unreasonable, a little deep over here toward the lingual, but when you undercut it, it gets deeper at the bottom, but you know, again, everything's leaning toward the distal here. Your marginal ridge wall is pretty tall, isn't it? It's closer to 2 millimeters than 1.5. Basic shape's okay. Clearance here is okay. Exit angle is good. Clearance here is reasonable. Exit angle is pretty good. You didn't sharpen the internal line angles and place retentive grooves. Okay. Okay, damage on the adjacent tooth, yeah, that's... Okay, and then let's say... So the height of the shortest wall is basically too tall. That means it's overextended pulpally. All right, well, you did a pretty nice job in this area here. But again, when you're doing it, make sure you compare the height of the wall to the burr, and then you'll be safer.
Okay.
And just never try to look down the axis again. Okay? So I'm going to give you a close on that one. The only problem is that you can't fix the biggest problem. It's the damage on the adjacent tooth. Okay. Now I immediately see you're leaning your burr facially instead of lingually. Right? So it's getting deeper pulpally toward the facial. And that's the last thing we want to do. Okay, so as far as the angulation of the pulpal force is concerned, so you're going to be hitting the buccal pulp horn, quite likely there. So again, when you do it, we look this way, so you know the angulation of the burr. You know you're not leaning it like this if you're looking the way I am. So make sure you're looking in the right direction. Okay, so this exit angle is pretty much 90 degrees. This one's a little bit obtuse. That's okay. We got a little bit of a gingival bevel. It's not too bad. You're starting to make a smoother connection to the facial lingual walls. Axially for composite, you're pretty deep on the facial side. So the lingual exit angle is 90 degrees.
Needs to be more obtuse.
I'm sorry, it's the facial one that's 90 degrees. It has to be obtuse for you to get adhesion with composite. A 90-degree angle like this is just not going to give you the adhesion that you want. But the biggest problem was that you just weren't looking in the right direction when you did the occlusal outline. Okay. Okay, so your taper is close here, but it looks like something's happening down there toward the chamfer that's a little different angle, but we'll see how that all plays out. Okay, so your chamfer is mostly pretty decent.
There's a ski jump.
You see a ski jump somewhere?
Yeah, right. In the facial aspect.
Right here?
At least from the outline context level.
So if you look down the wall and you see a chamfer that's heavier than 0.5 millimeter, it might be a ski jump, but then you check it with the ball burnisher. If it slides off, it's not a ski jump.
Okay.
And you look along there, if you don't see the hook coming up, then it's not a ski jump.
Okay.
Okay, so your chamfer is pretty uniform, your facial lingual draw pretty decent. So it's all going to come down to the occlusal. Okay, one thing I see is a sharp cusp.
Okay.
Right? Did you do the rule of thumb?
Yeah, I pressed it.
Did it hurt?
Not much.
Well, then you are having a little trouble with the nerves in your thumb. Because that would hurt. Ouch! Yeah, you need to bevel that kind of thing.
Okay.
Okay, so I don't see any C-plane at the right angle, which of course, if you point the burr this way and make the C-plane, it's always perfect, but we'll see. A little bit over-reduced on the A-plane, B-plane, a little under-reduced, at least it's a little more than 1 millimeter. Okay, so OX overextended on the A plane, underextended on the B plane. Where's the DLG on the C plane? Point the burr this way. Make a good groove there. The lab's going to have trouble making a groove on the crown since you don't have a groove on the prep. And if you keep the burr pointing this way, you'll always get the vertical angulation of the C plane matching the opposing tooth. And don't forget to bring the C plane around the corner at a 45-degree angle to the marginal ridge where it joins the facial cusp bevel. But hey, nothing to join because there is no facial cusp bevel. Okay, so those are things you need to be paying some careful attention to.
Could you show me how to do the C-plane again? Because I was having
Just
trouble
point the burr this way.
placing the burr.
Just point the burr this way. Now, if you're not looking down the axis in the mirror, you can't do it.
Okay.
If you're looking down the axis in the mirror, which is pretty easy, Point the burr this way, slam a big groove in there, and then keep the burr pointing that way all the way around here. And it always comes out great. Okay, so I'm pretty pleased by the axial reduction I'm seeing so far this afternoon. I'm not so happy with the occlusal reduction, but that wasn't too bad. Okay, so 9. Okay, so the shoulder is only about 0.5.
Okay.
So the axial reduction at the shoulder is about 0.5, 0.4, little more right here, and when you angle it, you're going subgingival. It should have been up here to start with, then when you angle it, it stays a little bit above the gingiva, but here you haven't angled it. Okay. You're leaning the burr this way, not this way. So you don't have an angled shoulder, and so that breaks off. Okay, so the axial reduction at the shoulder is underextended. The angulation of the shoulder is horizontal at the line angles. The facial taper, well, clearly you're over tapered, right? You got a funny angle down here. See, you didn't have a shoulder and then you made a shoulder by cutting underneath the wall. That's not what we do. We take the taper that you want, and then at that taper you reduce until you get the shoulder that you want. So now your incisal edge is shifted really lingually. Look where it is. It should be like right here, lined up with the other teeth, and got shifted lingually. So how are you going to get clearance? You're not. Okay? You'd have to reduce so much on the lingual to get clearance because you over-tapered the facial that your incisal edge you're going to get really over-reduced incisally. So that facial taper really got you in trouble. Okay, so the clearance is the big problem. So yeah, the facial taper, yeah, over-tapered. And you see how much trouble you get into that way. Oh, hold on. Okay, so we pretty much have the idea about this. Now you got some damage on the adjacent tooth there, huh? All right, but the big problem was the facial over-tapering. If you hadn't over-tapered it, you probably would have had the shoulder that you wanted at the bottom, and then everything would have worked out a lot better. So that taper is a really key part of the whole thing right from the start. Okay?
Yeah.
All right. What happened to tooth number 8? Decide to do a little more practicing? Or is that damage to the adjacent tooth? Or did you start the wrong tooth?
I started the wrong.
Oh, she's honest. All right, I can live with that. How'd you feel when you discovered you were prepping the wrong tooth? Okay, that's a pretty horrible feeling, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, so don't let that feeling go away. Keep that feeling in you. Feel totally miserable about it, and you probably will think a little more carefully when you start cutting a tooth the next time. Okay. All right, anyway, I'm going to start with 5. Okay, so this is a different type of dent, so you have to go pretty deep gingerly to get the clearance, don't you? And I think you had damage on 5 to begin with on your type of dent. So, but that doesn't seem to have been too much of a problem because your preparation is pretty wide facial lingually. Your clearances are good, your exit angles are pretty good on the occlusal part, but when you went gingerly, you change your exit angle. Now you have undermined enamel at the bottom of that wall. The lingual side's better in terms of your exit angles close to 90 at the top, a little bit obtuse at the bottom. Again, try to keep the walls flat all the way down to the gingival floor. And yeah, so maybe you tried to break off some of the enamel at the gingival margin. You had a little excess enamel down there potentially. So if you try to break it off, it might chip and go gingival, but you need to come back with the gingival margin trimmer and angle the gingival floor, and you get that fixed. Okay. But the undermined enamel at the facial wall toward the gingival is the big issue over there. Okay, so facial exit angle undermined at the gingival. Okay, and your wall height height here is just about a millimeter, but the shortest wall must be 1.5, right? That's not necessarily at the marginal ridge. It could be right here. If you'd come in at a 90-degree angle farther and then curved, you would have extended this area a little bit more and that wall would have gotten a little bit taller. Also, you're letting your pulpal floor rise a little bit toward the distal. So pulpal floor angle rises toward the distal. So the height of the shortest wall that's short. But it's not where you expected it to be, is it? But if it's a millimeter, that's a little bit too short. Now, it looks like you had a dovetail that wanted to go in the other direction. It should be going facially, right? Not lingually, because that's where the decay is, out in this corner. And make sure you lean the burr toward the marginal ridge when you go out in that area. Okay. And the damage on the adjacent tooth is a bit much. And again, if you're looking this way when you're doing it, you'll never damage the adjacent tooth like that.
So the issue is when I'm trying to make the internal line angle, like uniform line angle, that's when
The internal line angles?
yeah.
Well, when you're doing the internal line angles, you're far away from the adjacent tooth. Right?
The exit angle.
Okay.
So like when I'm trying to make the exit angle, that's when I make the.
Yeah, well, just look this way so you see where you are. That's the whole object, is we want to see exactly how close the burr is to the adjacent tooth. So look the way I am right now, and you won't hit it. You've seen me many times put the burr right next to the adjacent tooth and come down and flatten those areas out. Okay, but that's a reasonable try. But again, finish it with the hand instruments. See what it's like to actually get it done a little bit better, right? Okay, so as far as retention, you don't really have any. Okay, so that's a good try. It's hard to pass the class 2 because it's so easy to see the errors. And the errors can be fairly small and still fail the prep. Okay, so if I'm looking at 19, I'm seeing you're leaning your burr facially. Why would you lean the burr facially when you should be leaning it lingually, right? It's obvious you're leaning it facially, so you were looking in a different direction. You might be trying to look down this way or something like that. If you try to look down the axis, it's going to lead to nothing but hurt. Okay, so, and you've got a groove, you've got an extension here where there is no groove, and you have a really wide extension here where there's just a little groove going distally. Okay, so you're overextended at the distal and facial lingually. The pulpal floor angle slopes to the buccal. And again, that's going to tend to expose pulp horns, so that's the last thing you want to do.
I actually try to lean it towards lingual. Like I've made an effort to lean it towards the lingual.
Well, make an effort while you are seeing whether you're actually succeeding in your effort, okay? Yeah. Look along the central groove and you can see if you're leaning it lingually. So having it in your mind that you want to lean it lingually and seeing that you are leaning it lingually while you're doing it, two different things. Okay, I like your box pretty well, except for the facial wall right here, but lingual wall is pretty flat, pretty obtuse. The facial wall, you need to come back again and flatten that out. Now, obviously, you've got too much damage on the adjacent tooth, right? So, yeah, maybe you just had the burr turning when you took it out or something like that. But you got a few different nicks on there that are a little bit more serious. Okay, but I like your gingival bevel. It's almost joining the lingual wall smoothly, but it can't join the flat facial wall because you don't have a flat facial wall. So you need to come back and look this way and flatten out that facial wall. Make the gingival part of the wall match the occlusal part of the wall. Don't have any undermined enamel. Then that's where you start when you make the bevel, so that the bevel makes a smooth connection. So it's not joining the facial wall. And the facial exit angle, basically you have undermined facial Okay, that's just the bulk down there. The occlusal part isn't bad at all, but the gingival part, you let there be some undermined excess enamel there. Okay, again, good try. There are some signs that you're seeing the things you need to see, but yeah, but make sure you look so you really do see what you need to see. All right, so let's check this guy. So on 3, you got some funny taper. So taper should match the middle third here, so you over tapered there, and then you put a secondary plane that should be like this. So your basic taper is the angle of the secondary plane. So this was totally unnecessary, and it just makes things a lot more complicated. So you've over-reduced facially because you have put a secondary plane on that didn't turn out to be necessary in this case. And that basically overemphasizes the fact that you over-tapered facially. Now you also over-tapered lingually. So the convergence between the facial lingual walls is too much. And you can see the convergence between the mesial and distal walls is too much. So what did I say to do when you have that situation? Yes. In this case, you'd want to put 4 grooves in. One in the facial, one in the lingual to keep the crown from tipping off mesial distally, one in the mesial, one in the distal to keep the crown from tipping off buccal lingually. Now, of course, the occlusal anatomy, however it was done, is largely gone because you sort of over-tapered it away. But we still have to check for the clearances. And by the way, when you don't go this deep gingivally, you need to go deeper gingivally to get past the adjacent tooth. Remember, to avoid hitting the adjacent tooth, you go farther gingivally, right? Yeah. If you don't, you're going to hit the adjacent tooth and you're going to leave a ski jump, which you did. The mesial side's a little better. And so the ski jump's on the distal. All right, so easy to fix all that stuff. And even though you got the over-tapering, you can't fix the over-tapering, but you can correct for it by putting grooves in. Okay, lots and lots of clearance, right? Way more clearance than you need to have. And again, pay very careful attention to when you're doing the occlusal. You know, you got a groove going this way, but you should have a groove on the C-plane here. That's how we make the C-plane. You can make it look a lot better just by putting a groove here and then coming around that corner right now. Okay. So again, you can make a mistake, and a lot of mistakes are okay to make. Okay? You can even make a failing error, and that's okay. If you see it and you fix it before you hand it in. Okay, and how do you see it? You look for it. Look for each specific mistake. Okay. Okay. So looking down here, your axe reduction is only about 0.7 here, but it's almost nothing here at the shoulder. You're about 0.6 over here. We want a nice uniform 1 millimeter shoulder all the way from there to there. And I'm not really convinced it's angled. It is in a couple places, but not really over here. Again, the ball burnisher should slide off easily. Okay, so the axe reduction of the shoulder is underextended, and the angulation of the shoulder basically poorly formed at the line angles. Okay, let's check the taper on the facial. Okay, so we want to compare it to the middle third of this tooth. So again, you're over tapered. Now, you could get a heavier shoulder at this taper and you'd be fine. Okay, the taper that you have is basically the same as what the secondary plane should be. So go back with the taper for the middle third and redo the gingival 2/3 of that wall. Get a heavier shoulder. At the same time, you're correcting the taper and you'll be fine. Okay, so we got some chamfers that are pretty irregular. And again, when you're staying away from the gingiva, it's forcing you into the adjacent teeth, and you're likely to get ski jumps at the same time. You don't really have a ski jump over here, but you tend to have one on part of this wall over here. But again, easy to fix. All you have to do is just drop the margin gingerly, keep the end of the burr at the margin, and you'll be okay. Okay, so in size reduction, reasonable. Clearance, not quite enough. See that? But you've got a really wide edge here, so you could have made that smaller. Again, you got to get the clearance. We reduce the lingual fossa to make sure we get the clearance. Okay, so the chamfers are basically pretty irregular. Okay. And again, the position of the margins gingerly is what got you in a fair amount of trouble. And that's way too much damage on that lateral, isn't it? Okay. All right, so there's some things that you can work on each of those preps and get a little bit closer to what we want. Okay, sure. Sorry. I just need to go there. Okay, you don't need to move that. It's okay. All right. Okay, we'll get back to that in a minute. So 5, your clearance here is pretty good, and I like your exit angle. It's almost hinting. It's just sort of giving a slight little hint of acuteness. Okay, so if you were, and the clearance is minimal. If you were to take your hand instrument and just plane it to a perfect 90-degree angle, you'd be great, but not a big issue at this point. Your lingual wall is not particularly flat, but it's pretty close to 90. You're undercutting more than you need to, so keep the burr a little bit more vertical. Your clearance is a little bit more than you need. I'm seeing some damage on the adjacent tooth right here. Wow. You had the burr leaning like this. That means you were trying to look down the axis when you did part of this prep. Well, nobody can do that. Again, you cannot look down the axis and do a class 2. It just doesn't work. You'll always hit the adjacent tooth just like this because you don't know that you are. Okay, but I could probably reshape the adjacent tooth and have that look a little bit better. I'm not quite inclined to give it a major damage, but it's pretty close to it. Okay, so your wall height at the marginal ridge is okay. Your width is okay. Your dovetail is okay. I would lean a little bit more toward the marginal ridge. So it's a little bit too vertical in that area, but still we're surviving because you didn't cut too close to the marginal ridge. Width of the isthmus, a little much, but not too bad. Axial depth, so the gingival floor is a little bit too much. It looks like you're trying to put a retentive groove in the axial wall there. Yeah. Are you using a quarter round burr?
Yes.
Okay, well you're putting it in the axial wall. So you're like trying to hit the pulp horn. We want to have it go only in the facial lingual walls. And since your axial wall is too deep, don't put the grooves at the axial wall. I would just be happy to see you use the hand instruments at this point, and they will guide you if you want to use the quarter round burr, but you can be very deliberate about the hand instruments. Okay, and so yeah, you could have smoothed out that gingival floor, angled a little bit better with the GMT. I'm not seeing that you got this prep being visited by hand instruments very much. So, for example, you still have a sharp axial-pulpal line angle. But overall, pretty good. Okay, you're leaning your burr lingually. How refreshing. Okay, the width is a little bit more than you need to have. Just the size of the burr would be fine for a composite. Some of your walls are a little taller than they need to be, but you're pretty close. So I'd say you're a little bit overextended pulpally. And the width is maybe a little much, but not a big thing. Okay, so your clearance is facial lingually, a little bit overextended facially. Lingually is not too bad. Your exit angles are okay. But where's that axial wall going? You got pretty deep axially, huh? So again, if you look this way when you're doing it, you'll never get too deep axially, because you can see the difference between this and this. You don't have to see the whole burr. You don't have to see the wall. If you see a little bit of the burr, you can see the difference between this axial wall position and this one. And concentrate on making corners in that box and then cutting away from each of those walls so you create the shape of the axial that matches the outside surface of the tooth. Okay, so you went deeper gingival than you needed to because you went deeper pulpally than you needed to. So now you've got too much gingival clearance, and when you make a big bevel like that, you especially get too much gingival clearance. But the bevel is not bad, except for it doesn't quite connect to the facial lingual walls. The bevel should start at the facial lingual walls and go toward the middle, right? That way you know it's going to connect to the facial lingual wall. So cut down that wall into the gingival margin, then away toward the middle. Same thing over here. So it's not joining the facial lingual walls, but pretty decent otherwise. All right, and a little bit overextended gingivally. All right, so basically, you got pretty close on that one. The axial was the big problem. Okay. Okay, so the gold crown, let's see, number 3. So I'm a little nervous about the taper on the facial. It should be matching the middle third here, and you're leaning out a little bit, huh? So if your chamfer is a reasonable size, which it is, it's even a little bit weak here, then you're reduced less up here than you are down here because you have the wrong taper. Okay, so as far as axial reduction is concerned on the facial, so you're underextended facially at bulge. That has to do with the taper. Okay, so, but your chamfers mostly are fairly uniform. A little weak here, but a little strong over here, but no ski jumps that I can feel. So the chamfer is basically irregular. Not a big deal. Okay, the jaw, mesial-distally looks pretty good. Facial lingually looks pretty good between this corner. I was a little bit worried about the jaw because you leaned your facial wall outward. So a lot of times people are going to get an undercut, but you have enough taper on the lingual to get jaw between the facial lingual, even though you didn't get the right taper on the facial side. Okay, so no big issues when it comes to the axial reduction, but let's check the occlusal. It almost looks like you're getting the anatomy that we want. So your clearance is okay here, but on the oblique ridge, I can see that you don't have much clearance at all. Right there on the oblique ridge. I can check it. Normally we use the indirect methods, but sometimes we can actually get a ball burnisher in there and check. But you clearly don't have enough occlusal clearance on the oblique ridge. So again, the bite registration material will show you exactly what's going on there. And if you have the burr pointing this way, you made a groove on the C-plane, which is nice, but make the groove with the burr pointing this way. And remember to keep it pointing this way all the way around here. Then your C-plane is going to fit much better. Okay, so this can't pass because of the occlusal reduction, but it's close. Okay, so we'll see how number 8 is doing. Okay, so we're going to look down the facial wall. So I got about 0.8 or 9 there, about 0.6 over here, 0.7 over there. So, and you do have it angled gingivally, so the ball burnisher slides off. So let's take a look at the facial taper. That's going to determine how you did. Uh-oh. So you don't have the right taper. See that? So your minimal reduction axially at the shoulder, but you're much less reduced here because you have the wrong taper. If you'd had the correct taper, then you would have been okay on the facial wall. But with the wrong taper, that's the problem. Okay. So the facial taper it leans out. The ax reduction of the shoulder, let's say underextended moderately. So basically the ax reduction, facial ax reduction at the incisal is under reduced quite a bit, again because of the taper. Now, you know, when you look from the facial, it looks nice, doesn't it? But again, we have to look every direction. It's just like if you're doing a composite veneer on the facial and you only look at it from the facial, you'll never get the right contours, and that's the problem here too.
I'm always messing with the taper.
Well, make sure you look this way and then make a pencil mark if you need to on the adjacent tooth. And then touch the burr to that mark and then bring the burr over here and cut. Then it's fine. That's all you have to do. But don't lean it out like this, and at the gingival part you'll lean out even more. So you got to look so you see if you're getting the right taper. That's the trick. Seems like it should be pretty easy to do, right? But it's difficult sometimes.
Yeah.
Okay, so you got plenty of clearance and size reduction and all that. And so, yeah, and I like your chamfers overall, and I like your draw, except for facial lingually, it doesn't draw because of you're leaning out at the bottom, so you're tending to undercuts in the corners too. All right, and you were relatively kind to the adjacent teeth, so it has a nice look to it, but you just didn't check one important thing. Now, it's really easy to fix. All right, so let's see you do that. All right, cool. All right, I'm going to use your chair as a table. Can I have your workbook? Okay, thank you. Okay. All right, so for 5, all right, so you look at this wall here, it's less than 1 millimeter tall, so you don't have the right pulpal floor position at the marginal ridge. You have definitely an acute exit angle here, right? Over here your exit angle is okay, but you didn't come in far enough. You stopped here and then you started curving. Come in farther and then curve, and then it's easier to find the corner of the box. You've got you got damage on the tooth gingival to your prep. Now the assignment sheet. Okay, so you had damage on the tooth originally. That's the D5. It means damage on 5. So you used an old damaged tooth in your typodont, and that's what you decide to do the prep on. Okay, so not the best choice. So if you'd replaced 5, you would have been better off. But anyway, I knew you had the damage there already, so that's okay. All right, your gingival clearance is pretty good, but you're not flattening the gingival floor. You're getting undermined enamel and hooks of unsupported enamel at the gingival margin, so Take your 55 burr, smooth that out, and then use your gingival margin trimmer to angle it. Make retentive grooves in the facial lingual wall with the hand instruments. Then we'll be better off. But the big issues are the height of the shortest wall underextended. Again, the shortest wall in this case is at the marginal ridge, and it's definitely less than a millimeter, should be 1.5. You're leaning the burr lingually on the occlusal, so I think that facial lingually you have divergence. And you don't quite have divergence in the box, but you do on the isthmus. So the vertical angles so you're diverging facial lingually on the isthmus. Now the exit angle on the facial is undermined, so it's acute, and you have all that excess down there at the gingival. So yeah, if you were to clean this up a little bit and move the margin way out here to get rid of the undermined enamel, and you might pass, and then go deeper pulpally over here, and you might get a passing prep, but you can't leave errors that are definitely failing. Now you can fix them, and you can take a failing error and convert it into a non-failing error just by overextending, and that might be the best choice for you. Okay? But I'd say that's a good try. These class 2s are not the easiest thing in the world. Okay. Okay, and then if you look along the arch, when you're doing it, you'll know that you're leaning the burr facially instead of lingually, right? So you've got to make sure you lean the burr lingually, not facially. When you lean it facially, you're going to tend to expose the facial pulp horn. That we don't want. There's a groove here. There's no groove over here. So where you extended distally, you miss the groove. It goes directly to the distal, and you got some really tall walls, so you're definitely overextended pulpally. So the height of the shortest wall is overextended. The pulpal floor angle leans to the buccal, so that's going to be an issue for you. And then the outline form, you underextended in the distal groove because you kind of missed it. You extended lingually. A lot of people do that, but if you're looking along the arch when you're doing the outline, you can see where the distal groove is. Just go right into it. It's straight ahead of you. But if you're trying to look vertically downward, then all bets are off at that point. Okay, so your facial lingual clearance is, of course, way too much, but your facial margin, what's going on there? You didn't finish the prep? See that big hook there? That's a pretty big hook, isn't it? So lingual clearance is overextended, but the facial wall has this big, huge hook. Now, all you have to do is move the margin out and recut the angle, and then you're fine. So you can easily fix that, but you have to know that it's there. But again, well, just get rid of the hook. You're underextended facially with a big hook. Lots of undermined enamel. So move the margin facially, get the clearance, and then recut the angle inward at a 90 degree or at an obtuse angle, and you're fine. You can fix that in 30 seconds. But you have to know that it's there to be fixed, right? All right, so that was the biggest issue, and then really not a convincing gingival bevel. Okay. Okay, so number 3. Okay, so your taper on the facial looks pretty good. I'm not sure what this angle is here. We'll have to see that on the occlusal. So at least you're getting some taper, maybe a little bit too much, and you're getting a lot of taper on the lingual. So when you're getting too much taper facial lingually, then you probably want to put a groove on the mesial distal walls, right? Okay, your chamfer is heavy, not a ski jump, but heavy. And here it's no chamfer, and here it's a very weak chamfer. It doesn't quite connect smoothly through here or through here. So again, come from the lingual You can come from the buckle and make a nice margin through there. Little ski jump right there. Okay, but again, look from the buckle, then lean inward, and look from the lingual in the mirror, and you can make a nice, smooth, continuous margin that way. Okay, so you can have a heavy chamfer, you know, within limits and get away with it as long as it actually is a chamfer and doesn't have a ski jump. But even an area where you're not really all that much over reduced axially, if you have a ski jump, something that's going to break away, that's going to cause you problems. But the chamfer basically overall is irregular. Okay, and then your taper overall, taper facial lingually, of course, is too much. But if you were to take a 170 elbow, which we'll learn how to do next week, you could put a nice groove here and a nice groove here, and then you'd correct for the over tapering that way. Now, I like your clearance on the A plane. Your clearance on the B plane is probably a little much, but it works. But I'd like to get a C plane with the burr pointing this direction, not this direction. So again, when you're looking down the axis, you can see the direction you're pointing the burr, and then you can make a beautiful, beautiful C plane. Okay, so that's a good try. I'd say it's even close, because I could probably correct that, and you know, in just a minute, in just like half a second or half a minute, and have it a passing prep. Okay, so your PFM. So the axe reduction at the shoulder, not quite enough here, 0.6 or 7, but here it's clearly only 0.5 or so. So remember, you need a full millimeter all the way around into these embrasures if you want the porcelain to look good. So the axe reduction at the shoulder, underextended at the line angles. So remember to make the 3 depth cuts. Make the other depth cuts as close as you can get the burr to the adjacent teeth. That'll guarantee that you have a nice uniform shoulder round into that area. Heavy chamfer here, but it's not a ski jump. Pretty close to a ski jump right here. Got more taper than you need. And again, try to just keep the end of the burr at the margin so that you know you're getting a nice chamfer. Look along these walls a little better. So your chamfer is pretty irregular. So a proximal ski jump, you know, it's both the mesial and distal are a little questionable. So put a question mark on there, but it's scary looking. Okay, your facial taper compared to the adjacent tooth, pretty good. Secondary plane, not too far off. Your shoulder, by the way, is too steep. This is horizontal. That's a nice angle. That's too steep. So, yeah, it doesn't do you any good to have it too steep. You want to angle it about like this, about like that, but not so steep. Then you can't get enough porcelain there. Okay, so it's steep at the facial. All right, incisor reduction. Yeah, I would probably make it a little bit flatter, get a little more incisor reduction. How's the lingual clearance? Not enough. Okay, so you needed to reduce these marginal ridges more on the lingual. So if you reduce the incisor a little bit more, reduce the marginal ridges here and here. Again, one of the criteria is clearance. Okay. But easy to fix. All right, so just come down those margins a little bit more, go back and forth. One fossa between one marginal ridge and the other, and then you'll be okay.
Which foot do I need to use for reducing
The football, yeah, both the footballs, the big one and the small one, just back and forth in between. But you know, whatever.
Yeah.
You know, there's no burr that you can't use to get clearance there. Okay. Yeah. All right. So again, close. That was a pretty good effort. All right. Okay, let's take a peek. Oh, your poor little central. It's so short, the tiny little thing. We'll look at that a little bit later. Okay, so you know you have too much damage on the adjacent tooth with that number 5, huh? Okay, and you're tending to lean the burr away from the marginal ridge instead of toward it, so you need to be really careful about that. And you're very wide in the isthmus. Too much clearance here, and you let the burr slip around the corner and damage that margin. Remember, we find our clearance and then we cut from the margin inward, always inward, never let it go out. That killed it. For an amalgam prep, that killed that margin. Okay, and you have an acute angle over here. Okay, so the adjacent damage, and then the proximal exit angle. So the facial exit angle is super obtuse. Lingual exit angle is acute. The clearance facially is way overextended. Okay, and then the wall angle at the marginal ridge is undercut. Okay, you've got the pulpal floor in a reasonable position mostly. The width, the outline form is a wide facial lingual. Okay. And, you know, actually you had a little trouble controlling where the axial wall is, but, you know, not too far off, and you got some gingival clearance. You could have used more.
Okay.
But again, practice looking this way so that you know if you're hitting the adjacent tooth like this. Look this way when you're working in the box. Make sure the burr is vertical. You'll have much more success. So we're going to work on that a lot next week. Okay? Okay, so you're having trouble on your outline form on 19.
It's too wide.
Well, it's too wide, but also there's the pit over here. Here's the distal pit. You forgot to include it. So there's all this decay in that pit.
Okay.
And everything's shifted lingually, but tipping buccally. A lot of it's tipping buccally. Some of it's tipping lingually, some of it's tipping buccally. So again, look along the arch when you're doing the outline, and then you're in control of every aspect of the occlusal outline. So it's leaning too much to the buccal, and then you have underextended distal pit. Okay, you forgot there's decay in that pit. Again, look in the right direction. That's the key. Definitely too much damage on the adjacent tooth. So if you're trying to look vertically downward and work in the box, you're going to be leaning the burr against the adjacent tooth a lot and not know you are. Okay, so your clearances are a little much, not super huge. Your exit angles are reasonable. Your axial position isn't too bad. Your gingival floor is definitely overextended. Now, if you overextend pulpally, everybody wants to overextend gingivally so they get an axial wall, right?
Right.
But, you know, don't do that. You had enough gingival clearance before. I'd say if you don't have an axial wall, then you don't have an axial wall. The problem is the gingival floor. Now you have two problems. You have the gingival floor and the axial wall or the pulpal floor and the gingival floor. And of course, when you do that deep gingivally, it's hard to make a bevel, right? Okay. Okay, so your taper on the facial is not too far off, and as far as number 3 goes, there's a little concavity at the bottom that'll probably be okay. But your chamfers are pretty heavy, aren't they?
Yes.
This is
The lingual one is
way more than a millimeter there. When you get a heavy chamfer, it's likely to be a ski jump, And so if the ball burner shear doesn't slide off, it's a ski jump. Looks like some areas you tried to correct, but you didn't get all the ski jumps correct.
I was still trying to get them.
So yeah, you're just too much axe reduction. It's more like a full ceramic prep. Okay, I see no C-plane at all, by the way. There's absolutely no C-plane here. So let's check the clearances. I like your A-plane. Everybody's doing a nice job on the A-plane today, and then they're really messing up at the oblique ridge and not getting anywhere near enough clearance on the oblique ridge. And then most people aren't making a nice groove pointing this direction and keeping the nice C-plane around through here. But notice the oblique ridge. It's like you're trying not to reduce the oblique ridge, right?
No, I was not able to angle my burr in the right direction. I was not able to
Not
position
doing what, the B-plane?
the C plane.
Okay, we'll get there in a minute, but I'm just noticing again, looking this direction, it's really obvious that you're trying not to cut through the oblique ridge. It's like you're saying, oh, I don't want to cut the oblique ridge, and then you're coming up here. You want to cut the oblique ridge. That's your job, is to cut it off.
Yes.
That's why you don't have anywhere near enough clearance there.
Okay, good.
On the C plane, if you want to get the groove going in the right direction, look the way I am. Down the axis, you can see you're pointing the burr in the right direction, and then punch a groove in here. I want to see a nice groove on that C plane right there. Following this groove, you got a nice groove coming up here, follow it down here.
Okay.
Punch it in there, make that groove. Okay. All right, so you can go back over and remove some more ski jumps, and then make sure you get the anatomy a little bit better, but especially on the oblique ridge, you've got to get that clearance. Okay, so for number 9, the incisal reduction, that's a big one. Okay, so how to get that short? We have to replay the video of how that all happened. Remember what I said at the beginning? I said if you over taper the facial reduction, then the incisal edge is going to get really short, and the walls are going to get short, and you won't have much retention. Well, you certainly over tapered the facial, huh? See, this is the angle you wanted, matching the middle third. You got a lot of over taper there. That's where the incisal edge went for the most part. Okay, so you've got a full ceramic prep here. But the assignment was a PFM.
No, it's a PFM.
No, it's a full ceramic.
I was trying to remove the ski jump, but it got too much.
Yeah, but if you have a ski jump and you want to remove it, the only place where you're going to touch is the margin. You're not going to touch any place but the margin. The ski jump is a problem at the margin. When you want to remove the ski jump, you just drop the margin gingerly. You're not going to touch the axial wall again. That's what got you in trouble in the first place. So definitely ski jumps. Okay, tons of lingual clearance, right? Don't have to worry about that because you're so over-reduced incisally. Your axial reduction at the shoulder, not bad from here to here. If you'd gotten better taper and the incisal edge had been a lot taller, everything would have worked out a lot better. And then, of course, make sure when you're doing the chamfer, you're looking along the wall so you see where the end of the burr is.
Yeah.
You don't have to let the end of the burr get inside the tooth like that. Okay, so the facial taper was the biggest issue. That led to all these other problems. Okay?
Okay.
All right, cool. Now, the nice thing is, we're going to work on this a little bit today. We're going to be doing some work in the afternoon, and we've got 6 more days to tackle this and get it totally under control. Okay. Okay, so for 5DO, okay, so we know a couple things right away. I see the lingual wall here, so you're leaning the burr lingually a lot. That's why we look along the central groove this way when you're doing it, so you know you're not leaning it one way or another. If you do the occlusal and you look this way, you're always going to lean the burr lingually. Everybody always does, and that, of course, is not going to work. And your wall here at the marginal ridge is just slightly more than 1 millimeter. You're tending to undercut that marginal ridge. You have to be very careful about that, and you're leaning your burr into the adjacent tooth here because you're trying to look down the axis. So most of this just looks like you're trying to look the wrong way in a couple of different places. or you're looking the wrong way for whatever reason, and that's not working for you. Now, the facial exit angle is acute, but the good news is you don't have enough clearance. So to get more clearance, you can get rid of the acute angle. And on the lingual, you got too much clearance, but your exit angle is closer to 90, but it's too short. You stopped here. You should have come in a lot farther at that 90-degree angle and then curve. Then you could have made a much nicer corner in the box and would have had a lot more control over where the axial wall is. Okay, so you're divergent to the lingual and the isthmus. The height of the wall at the height of the short wall is a little bit underextended. The wall angle, you're trying to undermine the marginal ridge. Those are just tendencies that you're having, and so that's something you have to watch out for. The damage on the adjacent tooth is something we need to be careful about. You're definitely overextended axially. Again, the more you lean the burr toward the adjacent tooth, the more you try to look down the axis, the more you tend to undercut and overextend axial walls, and you got this part here also leaning. That's why you're not getting the hook, the acute angle off the facial wall. Keep the burr more vertical. It's going to make a huge difference. Okay, so again, most of the things that you're having trouble with are because you're not keeping the burr vertical. Not keeping the burr vertical here, not leaning at the right angle here, not keeping it vertical in this area. And so again, we always have a direction that we have to look to make sure that you can see if you're doing it the right way. Gingival floor width, of course, is overextended. Okay, but you know, the bottom line is you got to be looking in the right direction, knowing what it is you must see for every step. Okay, so you did the DO now, but you know, whatever you're doing, you still have to get reasonable clearance, so this margin should have been way over here, right? How did it get way over there? So you don't have enough clearance on the facial, but you're super far beyond where you should have been on the distal lingual. So that's the question. How did you get that far out? Can you remember how all that happened? So you have to kind of replay in your mind every step and then figure out, well, again, when you do the isthmus, you cut to the middle of the contact and you very gently go toward the lingual. You find your margin, then you come in at whatever angle you want, obtuse in this case, and then you're fine. Then it'll just stay there from then on. Okay, so you're trying to get the grooves in the right place, but here all you had to do is extend into the mesial pit and then come back again. So you're way overextended on that mesial side. Okay, and part of the time you're leaning your burr lingually, so that's at least reasonable. Obviously it's way too wide. Again, it should be just the size of the burr, right? The isthmus should be just the size of the burr. Your exit angle on the facial is a little bit acute. If it were 90 degrees, it still wouldn't be right because it's composite. So get more clearance and recut the angle with an obtuse angle and you'll be much better off. Over here, yeah, you had trouble bringing the axial all around the corner and getting enough width right there and controlling that margin. Okay, so you have to learn how to cut from the outside in all the time and keep the margin exactly where you want it from the beginning. Gingival clearance is okay. Your gingival bevel is kind of weak. I see you tried to make one. That's always helpful. Okay, and then the exit angle on the facial is basically pretty close to 90 degrees, and the exit angle lingual is poorly formed, just too irregular there. All right, well, that's the first time you tried that DO, but again, it's the same thing. Cut in the middle of the contact, find your margins, come in. Okay, then you're going to get it under control. Okay, so looking at the crown here, I see a very weak chamfer on this area. Very weak over here. A little better over here, weak over here. a little heavy over here, quite irregular. So you're going to have some thin gold in certain places. And again, if you're not making if you have a weak chamfer, then your burr is not in the tooth as far as it should be, which usually means that you're going to be hitting the adjacent tooth, okay, because you're not into your prep as much as you should be. But anyway, as far as the chamfers are concerned, it's just irregular. We can live with that. Your taper on the facial looks reasonable. We have to make sure that you have the same taper for the gingival 2/3 as far as you can, but you're not too far off. So facial lingually, your jaw is okay. Mesial distally, your jaw is just barely okay. Distal lingual to mesial buccal, it's okay. And the mesial lingual to distal buccal, that's okay too. Got a little problem underneath this area right here though. Yeah, you sort of cut underneath here. Again, put the burr at the angle you want and cut until you get the chamfer that you want at the bottom, and it's always going to be safe. Okay, so you have a little, there is a distinct problem at the chamfer margin on the mesial lingual. Okay, the occlusal. Okay, so not quite enough clearance there. It's only 0.5, 0.7 or 8 here. Definitely less than a millimeter over here, probably 0.5. Definitely not even 0.5 maybe on that oblique ridge. So again, those are things that you can get a better idea about even without using the bite registration material. So, and again on the C-plane, you want to get a really nice groove right here, much better than this. You got the right idea with this groove, except for we want to do this side and this side separately, then it's a much better defined groove. But point the burr this way and slam the burr in there and then come around and make that C-plane. So you didn't really get the form of the C-plane the way you wanted to. And of course the C-plane then comes around the corner to the marginal ridge where it joins the facial bevel on top of the marginal ridge. That's how we really get this prep refined better. Okay, but you know, pretty good try, but you know, those are things that can be fixed up a bit. Okay, so for an 8, so you got a fair amount of damage on the adjacent tooth here. I think, let's see. Okay. Okay, so at least moderate damage on the adjacent tooth. Okay, let's check his shoulder on the facial. Obviously nowhere near enough, right? Needed a full millimeter here, 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 and here. The axe reduction at the shoulder is no more than 0.5, so the axe reduction at the shoulder underextended the whole facial wall. So you didn't make your depth cuts deep enough axially. Your taper compared to the adjacent tooth is reasonable, but here you're leaning out a little bit. As you get closer to the line angle, you're leaning out a bit. So there's a tendency, if your shoulder is weak, there's a tendency to make it stronger by cutting underneath the wall and making the shoulder bigger. You can't do it that way. You have to move the entire wall. Just like if you want a stronger chamfer, move the entire wall until your chamfer gets bigger. You can't just cut a heavy chamfer at the bottom of the wall. That's not a crown prep. Okay, incisally, yeah, you're kind of like about 1.5 millimeters. So we need to get more incisal reduction. And so not enough clearance on the distal lingual. So these are things that are pretty easy to measure. You have to do it. And again, learn to look along this wall when you're making the chamfer, then along this wall when you're making the chamfer. Keep the burr leaning toward the axis all the time. But again, every step from the beginning is critical, and that facial reduction has got to be done just right. Okay? All right. So I'm going to collect everybody's workbooks right now. You should have an idea what you need to fix, so fix what you can. I'll collect everybody's workbooks.